creepy things happen before the grave.
Something Familiar by the Vesper's Bell. The door chime rang as I stepped into Sandbrook's St. Street Deli, a favorite local eatery of mine since childhood. I gave a nostalgic side glance to the now off-limits seating area where my father and I had often shared a meal, hoping wistfully that we'd be able to do that again before too long. "Hey, Samantha. Perfect timing. Just got finished with your order." Sam Sandbrook Jr. smiled at me from behind the plexiglass partition. My dad and I had always been on good terms with the family-owned deli, even though my mother and sister's Karen-ness, for lack of a better word, almost always brought them into conflict with the outspoken Sandbrook Sr. on the rare occasion they visited the deli at all. More than once, he'd remarked that I was so quiet because of all of my mother's verbosity. Not his word, went to my sister. "Perfect, thank you. Moxley's been cooped up in my trailer all day, and I need to get home before dark to give him some outdoor time," I remarked as I fumbled through my purse for my debit card. "You're still living out in Harwick Woods? That forest is haunted, you know," he teased as he rang up the total on the 1980s cash register they'd used since before I was born. "Yeah, I know," I said with an enigmatic smile, which he couldn't actually see because of my mask. "That's a very pink mask you've got there. I thought the surgical ones only came in blue," he commented. "Genevieve ordered them for us. I'm working out of her new age shop over on Albion now," I explained as I tapped my card to the modern peripheral that had somehow been jerry-rigged to the ancient till. She's convinced that surgical masks are the best after the N95s, but she wanted ones that were still distinct and feminine. "Distinct and feminine. That's Genevieve, all right," he agreed as he slid the bag through the hole in the plexiglass. I don't mean to pry, but you're dating Genevieve, right?" I froze, my eyes widening as the familiar, noxious feeling of my social anxiety began to churn in my stomach. "Oh, yeah, over a year now," I said softly, uncertain about where the conversation was going. "Why?" "I know it's silly and none of my business, but I was wondering about your sandwiches." He chuckled awkwardly. "I noticed late last year that whenever you came in here for takeout, you started buying 2 sandwiches instead of 1. I knew it wouldn't be for your dad, so I started thinking that maybe you were seeing someone. But Genevieve's a vegan, isn't she?" I let out a sigh of relief and nodded. "Yeah, she is. She checks every box on the left pretty hard," I chuckled. "So... And again, I know it's not my business. What's the extra sandwich?" he asked curiously. "Are you squirreling them away for when you can't stomach any more kale?" "No, it's not that. I like Genevieve's cooking," I laughed awkwardly, considering what I should tell him. "No, it's for a friend of mine, someone I met out in Harwick Woods." He furrowed his brow, his curiosity piqued but too polite to pry too much. "Anyone I know?" he asked. "Not anyone you'd remember," I answered. Not 20 minutes later, I was home in Harwick Woods, in a cemetery that a 19th century occultist by the name of Artaxerxes Crow had made hallowed ground, weakening the veil between the physical and spiritual planes, and hiding from the notice of unenlightened mortals. It was beautiful and secret and sacred, and I loved it more than anything other than Genevieve, my family, my cat, and one other person. I bent down by my altar, which I had placed by my fire pit, and lit the candle within my jack-o'-lantern-shaped holder that I had marked with a special sigil. I took my wand, tapped it to my command chakra, and then traced the same sigil in the air with it. "Elam Crow, under sacred sky and upon hallowed earth, I invoked our pack and call you hence from the astral plane. Heed my summons and come serve your lady. So mote it be," I incanted, bidding my spirit familiar to appear. Right on cue, a translucent blue astral body in the form of a lean man with white hair and a long coat manifested on the other side of the fire pit. "Hi, Elam," You can have a seat. I just want to talk tonight. Here, I got you an Italian hoagie from Sandbrook's. It's very important for a witch to show her appreciation for her familiars so that their relationship doesn't deteriorate into just giving and obeying orders. But how you show appreciation can take many forms. On 2 occasions, when Elam had still been alive, including the night he died, I had shared sandwiches with him from Sandbrook's Deli, so I thought that would be a meaningful tradition for us. He also just seems to enjoy the chance to consume food again, though I am as confused as you are about how that actually works. As far as I know, consciousness is the only thing that can exist on both the physical and astral planes, so long as the lost matter is compensated for somehow, kind of like hawking radiation from a black hole. Elam might be doing that, or his astral body might just be telekinetically grinding up the sandwiches into such minute crumbs that they dissipate into the air without me noticing. Or it could be something else altogether. I never asked him about it. Seems rude. Elam accepted the sandwich with an appreciative nod and sat in the chair next to mine. I unwrapped my own Reuben, tossing a piece of beef down to my cat Moxley, who was already eagerly pawing at my leg.
"So, what's on your mind, Samantha?"
Elam asked before he took his first bite. Well, I've been trying to research Artaxerxes since the only information I have on him is from his own journals, which are very obviously biased towards glorifying him, I began, already tearing off a second helping of beef for Moxley. But I can't find anything else about him, or you, or the rest of the family. The will-o'-the-wisp ate it all. I was wondering how much you knew about him.
"Very little. I didn't even know his first name until you told me,"
he admitted.
"I do know that he was my great-great-great-grandfather, and that before she died, my daughter Rosemary was the 7th generation of crows to bear Persephone's favor, as we called it. The reason I mention that is because the 7th generation crow was to be the significant somehow, or at least that's what got passed down to me. Did you find anything about that in the journal you dug up with him?"
Not exactly. The journal was obviously meant for his eyes only, so a lot of it's pretty cryptic, I answered. More than once, he rambles on about how he's ensured the greatness of his bloodline, and how, when the stars finally align, it will be one of his descendants to usher in a rapturous iconoclasm that will leave the mortal plane forever altered.
"Well then, I guess we can safely rule out prophecy as being one of old Xerxes' gifts,"
Elam scoffed, hints of bitterness and sorrow seeping into his voice. I considered dropping the line of inquiry entirely, but I still had a few nagging questions. One aspect of the favor I'm a little unclear on. Did all of you inherit the physical aspects as well as the spiritual ones? Your white hair, silvery skin, and bright blue-green eyes? I asked.
"Every relative I've ever met looked like this, though it's milder when we're younger."
Elam nodded.
"Rosemary, for instance, had platinum hair and pale skin, so she didn't really look too unusual. Why do you ask?"
I just wanted to rule out the possibility that I am not some unaccounted-for descendant of Artaxerxes, I admitted, modestly averting my gaze.
"With red hair and brown eyes? Not a chance,"
Elam assured me.
"No, Samantha. You are a monkey rich in Xerxes' most well-laid plans, and had you discovered this place 1 month later than you did, I and every crow, except for Xerxes, would still be in Hades right now."
Yeah, it's funny to think about how different my life and your afterlife would be if we'd never met, I mused, sneaking in a bite of my sandwich before moving on to my next question. What do you think the odds are that there are crows who have yet to shuffle off their mortal coil?
0,
he said flatly.
Xerxes' deal with Persephone was that he and every descendant would sacrifice themselves to the wisps here on All Hallows' Eve, by no later than their 70th year. Each of us who failed to honor that deal brought compounding waves of misfortune upon our entire family, which eventually became fatal. By the time my father's 70th birthday rolled around, it was down to just him, me, and Rosemary. I pleaded with him to sacrifice himself so that Rosemary wouldn't have to grow up without a father, or so that I wouldn't have to bury my daughter. But he was too damn stubborn. He said he was too healthy and had too much to live for, that he didn't trust me to manage what was left of our assets on my own, and that he was not to blame for the curses of the elderkin. So, his 70th Halloween came and went, and Rosemary never saw her third Christmas.
He paused, putting the sandwich down as he buried his face in his palms. I could feel the heartbreak of his daughter's death welling up in him. Elm, you don't need to go on if you don't want to, I said softly.
Thank you, but I can continue,
he assured me.
I blamed my father for Rosemary's death, and for my wife's suicide not long after. We fought, physically, and that was the last time we spoke before he died. That was the really cruel irony, as far as I was concerned, that his refusal to sacrifice himself for me or my daughter hadn't even brought him an extra year. He died of a stroke, suddenly, but not surprising for a 70-year-old smoker, and he had already cut me out of his will. Chamberlain, that conniving bastard, took advantage of that and was able to scoop up most of what was left of my family's assets for himself, and, well, you know the rest. So no, I don't think there could be any more living crows out there. I only managed to survive until Halloween by hiding out here. Any long-lost relatives would still be cursed, and would have died sometime between my father's death and you turning Xerxes' body over to Persephone.
I nodded, satisfied with his answer, and unwilling to dwell on such an unfortunate topic any longer than was necessary. You mentioned Chamberlain. Crowley and Chamberlain seems to be the only place that the name Crow wasn't forgotten, I told him. How well did you know Chamberlain?
Not very. Like I said, my father didn't trust me with the business. I only ever met Chamberlain a handful of times,
he replied.
He was a hard man to read, though, both conventionally and clairvoyantly. At the very least, he had enough occult knowledge to occlude my extrasensory perception.
You mean he's a psychic dead zone, like St. Aria's Church? I pressed, simultaneously intrigued and alarmed at the prospect. Elam nodded in the affirmative. There's a lot of weird rumors about Chamberlain, including that he's the same Chamberlain that founded his financial firm 200 years ago. Did you ever get that impression?
He doesn't seem to have aged since I first saw him as a child, but you know, neither a share, so make of that what you will.
Elam shrugged, before growing pensive.
Do you still have all the keys from the key ring I left you?
Of course. Why?
I have a safe deposit box at CC&C, box 373, under the pseudonym Cyril Vance,
he replied. I took out the key ring he was referring to and quickly flipped to one with the numbers 373 engraved on it. This one? I asked.
That's it. With that, my pseudonym, and the password, Asphodel, they'll let you access the box. They won't ask for ID. That's their safe deposit box's main selling feature, actually. They don't need to know who you really are, assuming that Chamberlain never figured out that the box was mine. It's probably still intact.
What's in it? I asked. He took a moment to consider his response.
I'd like to call them scrolls, just to sound dramatic, but I suppose they're just rolled up pieces of paper,
he replied.
The occult dealer I bought them from said they were spell scrolls made by a witch who came here with the first settlers. I could sense that they had astral properties, but I was never able to read them. The witch who made them had taken measures to ensure that only clairvoyant women would be able to uncover her secrets. I bought them with the intention of giving them to Rosemary when she was old enough, but now, Now I want you to have them.
You're sure? I asked carefully.
Absolutely.
He nodded without hesitation.
You know, if Rosemary had gotten the chance to grow up, you're the kind of woman I would have been proud to see her grow into.
I blushed at the undeserved compliment. A socially awkward, bisexual, technically grave-robbing pagan, illegally squatting on municipal land? I scoffed dismissively.
A gifted, independent, well-learned witch who accomplishes what she puts her mind into no matter what.
He answered back. I accepted the compliment without further resistance, and we finished our sandwiches without any more talk of the past. A couple of days later, after my last counseling appointment at Genevieve's, I took a walk over to Crow, Crowley, and Chamberlain to see if I could get access to Elam's safe deposit box. It wasn't a long walk, and for reasons I couldn't quite place my finger on, I didn't want to risk them getting my license plate number. Maybe it was just my anxiety, but even though I wasn't doing anything wrong or dangerous, it still kind of felt like I was. I had told Genevieve about Elam's scrolls. She was extremely interested in getting a hold of the first-hand accounts of another HALLOWED witch, but there didn't seem any need for her to come with me. It was a simple enough errand for me to handle on my own, and she had her afternoon backyard yoga class to teach. CC&C wasn't really her kind of place either, and she hinted she was a bit wary of Chamberlain himself. I eschewed my customary witchy dress in place for more generic dress pants and the nicest long-sleeve blouse I had, in the hopes of both blending in and avoiding recognition. I wore my mask, a large pair of sunglasses, and I put my hair up in a bun under a wide-brim hat, thinking myself to be as inconspicuously incognito as I could possibly be. Crow, Crowley, and Chamberlain was a Greek Revival-style building with the big stone columns lining the front entrance, and a pair of marble sphinxes flanking the stairs. The inside was just as ostentatious, with dark marble floors, mahogany paneling, and a 3-tiered fountain in the lobby. Behind the counter was also a large portrait of 3 19th century men, and I recognized Artaxerxes Crow immediately. The tall, slender, scarlet-clad likeness of either Chamberlain or his ancestor was familiar enough as well, as he often made himself noticeable at public events. The third man was presumably Crowley, who I didn't actually know anything about. I was so fixated on the portrait, I almost didn't hear when the teller waved me up to the counter. "Hello, I am the beneficiary of Cyril Vance, owner of Safe Deposit Box 373. I'd like to collect its contents," I announced as I presented the key. The teller inspected it briefly before typing the information into her keyboard. "Password?" she asked. "Asphodel," I replied. "Excellent. Right this way, miss," she said, leading me across the counter and down to the vaults. She punched in a code to open a cabinet full of keys. Picking the one marked 373, she signed it out on a nearby clipboard and then opened the vault to the safe deposit boxes. She led me straight to 373 and, using both of our keys, unlocked it for me. "Take all the time you need," she said, politely refusing to open it and excusing herself to wait outside. I took off my sunglasses, and after taking a furtive glance around for any spies or cameras, I pulled open the drawer. Inside, along with a heavy manila folder, a velvet case, and a leather coin purse, were the scrolls Elam had described. They were essentially just rolled up sheets of paper held closed by brass rings. I picked one of them up and examined it carefully, weighing it in my hand. It was old and yellow, but didn't seem like it would disintegrate on me if I tried to open it. I cautiously slipped off the brass ring and unfurled the paper. At first, it was blank, but being observed by a witch activated whatever latent enchantment it was under. Dark, nebulous vapor of astral matter was summoned into existence and began to swirl about the page, forming an elegant, floral border around its edges. Something like a living contour map began to form upon the page itself, and as I skimmed over the fleeting calligraphy and sigils that marked them, I realized I was looking at a map of ley lines. I've read a lot of varying conjectures on what exactly ley lines are, but my personal theory is that they're currents in the aether, a primal substrate that underlies all reality. They're most prominent in the astral plane, but they seem to affect paranormal activity on the physical plane too. The veil between planes is always a little weaker around ley lines, and especially where they intersect. The undulating lines danced upon the page, their strength waving and waning, their positions shifting subtly over time. I wasn't sure if I was looking at a record or a forecast, which suddenly became relevant as a powerful convergence of ley lines briefly came together before disbanding again. If I was looking at a forecast, when and where was that predicted to happen, and how long would it last? The implications of such a convergence were, though vague, still significant, and it seemed like something I should be prepared for. I began scanning the scroll to see if I could decipher any system of coordinates or dates, when the map instantly dissipated right before my eyes. "What?" I muttered, unsure about what had just happened.
"Why, hello, hello!"
A man's voice came from the vault's entrance. I spun around and saw who I instantly recognized as Chamberlain leaning in the doorway, tall, slender, and dressed in a dark red three-piece suit with a matching top hat, hardly any different from his portrait. His mask was actual gold and looked like the bottom half of an Oni mask, with a snarling smile and prominent fangs. The black cloth behind it giving the impression of a abysmally dark and deep gullet. Most disturbingly of all, I couldn't read him at all with my clairvoyance, exactly as Elam had said. Hello, I responded, rolling the scroll back up and sticking it in the bag I had brought with me. I'm sorry, was I taking too long?
"Oh no, of course not. I just happen to be available at the moment, and I always like to offer my personal attention to our clients whenever possible,"
he explained, introducing himself with a curt bow.
"I'm Seneca Chamberlain, chairman of Crow, Crowley, and Chamberlain. How may I be of service to you, miss?"
He spoke with a mid-Atlantic accent, like an old movie star. Since Chamberlain was supposed to have been born locally, it was logically an infection, but for some reason, it gave me the impression that it was a worn-down native British accent. Thank you, but no thank you. I'm just here to collect some personal, private documents, and I was just verifying their contents before taking them," I said quickly, shoving the remainder of the box's contents into my bag and pocketing the key. I fumbled with my sunglasses before making my way to the door, but Chamberlain refused to move aside. He glanced up and down my completely occluded face before letting out a short chortle.
"May I just say, miss, that I admire such a distinctly pink surgical mask. The blue ones are so common as to be positively blasé," he remarked with a roll of his eyes. "I suppose that for their traditional purpose, an easily identifiable mask is counterproductive, but since our masks are solely for medical purposes, it's advantageous for them to be easily recognizable, isn't it?"
I swallowed nervously and nodded, but said nothing. He stepped aside then, gesturing politely that I was free to go. I nodded my thanks and scurried out with my bag of occult scrolls clutched tightly to my side. Just before I reached the exit, I heard him shout from behind me.
"If you're ever interested in opening up your own account with us, I'd be happy to see it personally, Miss Sumner."